I was Christina's daughter. I was not the biological child of the woman who had held my hand as she died, who had pressed her palm against my face at the airport and looked at me with that expression I had never been able to name. I was the daughter she had chosen at 22 years old, in the middle of a political system that made everything harder, out of love for a sister and commitment to a child who had not yet arrived. I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time. The house was quiet around me, the Romanian January doing its work outside. I kept reading the letter, not because there was more to understand, but because I needed something to do with my hands, while my understanding of my own life reorganized itself. I thought about every memory I had of my mother and looked at it from the other side of this information. The way she looked at me at the airport, the dancing at my wedding, the spring visits, the preserved vegetables, the particular attentiveness she had always given me, the quality of her love that had always felt somehow both complete and slightly effortful, as if she were loving me hard on purpose. Not because the love wasn't real. I understood now that the love was entirely real, was in fact the whole point of the story. But because she had chosen it, every day, the way you choose something that you have committed to so fully that the choosing becomes invisible except in moments when you can see it clearly, if you are paying the right kind of attention. I found a second document in the box, beneath the letter. A birth certificate, Romanian, dated 1985. My birth certificate. The names of my parents listed exactly as I had always known them, my father and my mother. No mention of Christina. Whatever had been done completely and officially, in the way that things were sometimes done in communist Romania, when the right people were in the right positions, and favors were exchanged that no one spoke about openly. I called Thomas that evening. He answered immediately. I could hear the Amsterdam sounds behind him, a tram somewhere, the particular quality of the Dutch evening. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Are you all right?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said, "I'm coming back tomorrow." I told him he didn't need to. He came back the next day. He sat across from me at that kitchen table, and he read the letter, and he listened to everything I said about what I was feeling, which was a great deal of things, not all of them compatible with each other. I was angry, not at my mother, not quite, but at the not knowing, at the 40 years of a story I had been the center of without being told I was in it. I was also, and this surprised me more, moved in a way I hadn't expected, because the letter was a love letter, really. Not a romantic one, but a letter from a woman in an impossible situation doing the most loving thing she could think of for a child who had not yet been born. Christina had chosen life for me at great personal cost, in a country that was making everything difficult, and my mother had met that choice with a willingness of her own that had shaped every single thing that came after. Thomas said, "Do you want to find her? Christina?" I said I didn't know. I said I needed time to sit with what I already knew before I went looking for more. I spent 3 more days in Sibiu, in my parents' house, with my father, who I now understood was my father in every way that had ever mattered, and who I could not bring myself to ask about this because he was 81, and grieving his wife, and some truths, I decided, are yours to carry without distributing them to people who cannot be helped by receiving them. I walked the cobblestone streets under the watching windows, and I thought about identity and what it is made of, whether it is made of blood or of love, or of the daily accumulation of everything that has been given to you, and I came to the conclusion that it is made of all of those things, and also of the choices you make about what to do with them. I went back to Amsterdam. I went back to work. Thomas and I talked about it almost every evening for several weeks, the slow processing of something too large to understand all at once. He was patient in the way he had always been patient, which I found myself more grateful for than I had vocabulary to express. He said once, "You are still exactly who you were before you found the box." I told him that was true, and also not true. He said, "Yes, both." That was the right answer. 2 months after returning from Sibiu, I hired a researcher who specializes in tracing people through Romanian records. I gave her what I had: the letter, the birth certificate, the name Christina, and the city Bucharest, and the year 1983. 6 weeks later, she came back with a result. Christina was alive. She was 60 years old, and she lived in Cluj-Napoca, a city in Transylvania, where she had been a librarian for 30 years. She had never married. She had no other children. I sat with this information for a month before I did anything with it. I wrote and deleted several drafts of a letter. I asked Thomas what he thought, and he said, as he usually did when I asked him what he thought about something he believed was fundamentally my decision, "What do you think?" I told him I thought she probably knew I existed. He said probably yes. I told him I thought she had wondered. He said very likely. I asked him what he would do. He was quiet, and then he said, "I think I would want her to know that things turned out well, that the child is okay. Whatever else happens, I would want her to know that." That was the sentence that decided it for me. I wrote a letter. 1 page, in Romanian, careful and honest without being overwhelming. I told her I had found my mother's box after she died. I told her I had read the 1983 letter. I told her I was not writing to accuse anyone of anything or to complicate her life, but because I thought she deserved to know that the child she had made a very hard choice for had grown up loved and had become someone she might not be ashamed of. I sent it to her address in Cluj. Then I waited. 3 weeks later, my phone rang with a Romanian number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice, older, careful, said my name as a question. I said yes. She said, in Romanian, "I have been waiting for this call for 40 years. We talked for 2 hours that first time. She told me things my mother had never told me, not because she was hiding them, but because you cannot tell a child the story that belongs to another person. You can only give them the version that is yours to give." Christina told me about the man who had been married and who she had not known was married until it was too late, and who she had cut off completely and permanently the moment she found out. She told me about the months of the pregnancy, managed in secret, the conversations with my mother that had saved her. She told me that giving me up had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and that she had not doubted it was right, and that both of those things had been true simultaneously for 40 years. She asked me about my life. I told her about architecture, about Amsterdam, about Thomas. I told her about the spring visits, the preserved vegetables, the way my mother danced at my wedding. She cried when I told her about the dancing. She said, "That sounds like her. She was always the one who danced when she felt something true." We have met twice now, in person. Once in Cluj, where she took me to the library where she had worked for 30 years and showed me the reading room that she had designed herself with second-hand furniture and a very particular arrangement of light. Once in Amsterdam, where Thomas took us both to dinner at the Indonesian restaurant near the Vondelpark, where he had first told me he wanted to try this properly, which was either a coincidence or something he had arranged deliberately, and which I chose not to examine too closely because some things are better as they are. Christina and I are not mother and daughter. We are something without a clean name, connected by blood, and by a choice made 40 years ago, and by the particular intimacy of 2 people who have been part of each other's story, without being in each other's lives. We write. We call. We are learning the shape of what we are to each other slowly, and without pressure, which is the only way to learn it. Thomas and I have a daughter now. She was born 14 months ago, which means we were slower arriving at parenthood than we had planned, and I am 42, and she is the best thing that has ever happened to either of us without qualification. We named her Mara, which is a shortening of Elena in some Romanian traditions, and which also sounds, if you listen carefully, like the beginning of Amara, which means eternal in Latin. She has Thomas's blue eyes, and what Christina tells me, when she sees the photographs, is a very particular expression around the mouth that she recognizes from somewhere, though she cannot quite say where. I still think about my mother every day, not with grief anymore, or not only with grief, with something more complete than that, something that holds both the loss and the fullness of what she was to me. She chose me before I was born. She kept a secret for 40 years, not out of shame, but out of the understanding that the story belonged to the child to find when the child was ready, and she had tried to tell me at the end when she understood she was running out of time. The box was her way of finishing the sentence. I went back to Sibiu last spring, alone, the first time since she died. I walked the cobblestone streets in the early morning when the city was still quiet and the light was doing what it does in Transylvania in April, which is arrive slowly and then all at once. I stood outside my parents' house and I looked up at the attic windows, the ones that look like eyes, the ones that watch everything. And I thought about all the things those windows had seen without my knowing, all the stories moving through the rooms below them that were also, all along, my story. Some things you only understand when you are standing in the right place at the right time, looking up.